So it all started back in England, like it did for all of us back in our youth. And when you're young, you have a lot of different ambitions. In England, there is a big tradition about something called the Guinness Book of Records. And what it does is it's a compendium of, the tallest person, the sort of like youngest person to ascend Mount Everest. And I was always interested and enthused about this. So this is actually from 1978 edition, which is when I was born. So give you an idea of what I looked like back then, here I am. And as you see, I really believed I would be going places, even if the reality didn't quite always match up. So my thought at that time was that I'd love to get a record in something. It, could almost be anything. In fact, my auntie happens to have the record for going from shorn wool to a knitted sweater. And they had a team of 4 of them do that in the span of 20 hours, if you believe it. So I had a few different attempts at this in different ways. So the first attempt was a TED Talk I gave 2008 on Blindfolded Origami, and I was attempting what I thought might be the world's most impractical hobby. And tried this, and they just rejected it outright. So decided to try it again, gave another TED Talk on Santa Tracker, which was many years of my life while I worked at Google. And we had something that handled just under 2 million requests per second, which was a very large amount for any website to do. So personal record, a Google record, but no world record. So I feel it's like no soup for you. And so I went on from this, and what caught my attention, though, back in 2012, I think a number of you may have seen this already, but it was Elon and JB's blog article on the Model S efficiency and range. And it talks through a lot about what makes a difference when it comes to distance traveled on the vehicle. And so I dug into this, I learned about it more, I talked with some other experts and people who've done it before, and decided that I was going to go for this. And so when I bought the Model S in late 2012, I decided that I would expressly get the car just for doing the record. I mean, I wanted the car anyway, but for example, the choices on the 19-inch rims, largest battery pack, and so forth were partly influenced by that. And this is when we were picking it up at the Fremont factory. I think that they wanted to make their Q4 numbers, and so they said you can meet Elon if you pick it up by the end of the quarter. The only thing is that I just have no idea what I was saying at the time. But that's, of course, that's my wife and, of course, Elon. So when I was there, though, I'm very excited about getting this car, doing this record. And the thing was, though, that I hadn't been doing the proper thing and reading the TMC blogs. Because if I had done that, I would have already known that someone else had already got over 400 miles. It was the big yardstick that they talked about. And that was, of course, David Metcalf and his son. And they did this out in Florida, where they got 423.5 miles. And so here I am wandering around, just about to pick up my Model S thinking, oh, this is going to be so much fun to do this. And it turns out that someone's already done it. And so I was thinking, well, it's like being the second person on the moon. No one remembers that one. But still, I thought, well, if I'm going to pursue this, I have to do better than David, seriously. So I talked to David, I talked to Brad Armstrong. Brad Armstrong set the record in the Tesla Roadster, and they were very helpful sharing their feedback and advice on what they did and how it had worked. So I went on from that, did a lot of research. So this is from the blog, and And this is just, I'm going to list out some of my recommendations as I differ slightly from the blog in some respects. So first off, agree that the constant speed is good. The challenge with cruise control is cruise control wants to try and keep it constant. And so it's very difficult to find a large flat area to do a record attempt. So usually it has some hills up and down. And the cruise control in that situation, it will try and accelerate as you're going up hills, and it will sometimes allow regen when you're going downhill to try and maintain a constant speed. When you're doing a distance attempt, though, you don't want either of those situations. You don't want large amounts of acceleration, and you don't want regeneration. Now, you might think, well, regeneration is good because that's putting energy back in the battery. But when you take energy, when you move energy around, and particularly when you move kinetic energy from the vehicle into the battery energy through the regeneration process, and then take that energy out again, it's often about 70% efficient for electric vehicles. So you lose 30% of the energy in the process. I don't know the specific numbers for the Model S, but it's probably something like that. And so that every time you're doing regeneration, it means that there's a big loss in that. Now, it turns out that you're much better off translating between kinetic energy and something else that's called gravitational potential energy. So the idea is that if you come up a hill, then it's quite fine to just let the car slow down a bit as it goes over the hill, because you're building a little bit of energy by raising the vehicle higher up. And it's like you take an object, you pick it up off the ground, you raise it up, it takes energy to do that. You release the object, the energy is converted back into motion downwards. And that conversion from speed into height and back again is much more efficient than doing it through the battery. So the other part, so it should be around 22 miles an hour. Doesn't have to be exact. So the other part, flat ground, no wind. Main thing is that if you're doing a lot of altitude loss, then really you can cheat very effectively at that. Climate control off. Get ready for some baking yourself, essentially. So less than 300 pounds of vehicle load. Well, I did it as one person, 140 pounds. Well, actually, it's not quite true. Maybe it's 180, but you know, there we go. Don't tell anyone. You know, I mean, if we can trust that guy to give us secrets to the Model S, I'm sure you can keep that bit under wraps. So the other part was, you know, windows up, sunroof closed. Again, more human baking. For the tires, I actually overinflated my tires slightly. So this is not recommended, and it makes only a marginal difference. And of course, you do it at your own risk for that. The new battery pack, I actually did this the very first time I charged the car to maximum was when I was doing the record attempt. Very, you know, very soon after I purchased the vehicle as well. And the other thing that the blog doesn't mention is the impact that temperature makes. So it seems that around 70 degrees Fahrenheit is the ideal temperature, and ideally it would stay constant throughout the day. But of course, with the change from daytime to night, the temperature inevitably falls. And what I saw was that the efficiency got significantly worse during the night when it was colder. And I'm sure you're familiar with that with cold driving already. So, and also there's new tires out, the Michelin Primacy tires, that you know, seems to be somewhere like around 3% more efficient. And I did not have those, but anyone doing a record attempt now, you're best off doing using those tires. Safety, warn police ahead of time. You should have a slow-moving vehicle sign. You basically want to be away from any traffic whatsoever. I did not have support vehicles or alternate drivers, because bear in mind that you're going for a very, very long time. And I'm pretty good on little sleep, but it's best if you could swap with somebody else. Okay, so why 22 miles an hour? So some of you may be familiar with this from looking at the blog, but the main thing in the blog came out with these two graphs. What they show is how the efficiency changes depending on the speed that you're driving. So just looking at the graph on the left first, this is the battery watt hours per mile for a constant speed. So basically, how much energy does it take to go a mile? And depending on your speed, that changes. So we just add in the rest of the graph. If you're doing very low speed, most of the energy goes to fixed costs like the screen, computer, car electronics. So for example, if you just had the car stationary and on, eventually it would exhaust the battery. It would take a very long time for that to happen. But of course you would have traveled 0 miles. And so it means that it takes an infinite amount of energy to go nowhere. On the other hand, at high speeds, this is where air resistance comes into play. And so when you double your speed, typically the air resistance goes up by the cube, so it goes up by a factor of 8. And so that's why it steadily deteriorates, the efficiency steadily deteriorates as you get higher. So it's like Goldilocks principle, not too slow, not too fast. In the middle, down there, the sweet spot is around 22 miles an hour. Now, look at the other graph saying, well, okay, how far can you go for a given speed? And you see the same thing as well. Now, from that, I did it from the Arvin Supercharger. So it was having fun in the Central Valley, which was a new experience for me. And charged it up to maximum and then headed off on the trip where I was going loops very nearby to the supercharger. Now, because I had my screen dim to save energy, I had to put this along it otherwise I couldn't see the screen because of all of the sunlight. This is the little bit of regen that I had at the start, and after that, I basically had no regen at all throughout the record attempt. So most of it is, you've got to remember that this is about the most boring record you could do. It's long, open roads, straight, but it's a lot of boring interspersed by moments of sheer terror as big things blow past and then it's back quiet again. And you're just going around in loops and loops and loops and loops, and it slowly gets darker, and slowly gets night, and then here it is, the getting over 400 miles. And as you can see, the energy here, it was about 186 kilowatt hours per mile. So that's really where you have to get to, somewhere between, and I think that the best that I ever did was 177 watt hours per mile over a loop of 12 miles. And it varied mainly according to the temperature. So as it got colder and colder at night, the energy taken kept rising. So after that, well, of course, okay, got that yardstone, so how far can I go? So this is when I'm down to 9 miles an hour. This is where it starts to get exciting. So remember that number 9, and then this is what the display showed, 413. And if you can add 9 to 413.5, you'll realize it comes up to 422.5. And so there's this image of David in my head at 423.5, and it's like, now, damn. So, how close are we going to get to this? I mean, it's not it actually surprised me how close that we were to each other. And so I went on with this, and this is when I'm down to 3 miles of range. And this is 418, so that makes it 400, sort of like 22 basically. And so I'm still thinking, damn it, I'm gonna miss it. I just like on edge. And you have to remember by this point, I'd been going for about 21 hours constantly at 22 miles an hour. I'd sipped water very slowly, so I didn't need to go to the bathroom break. And I didn't leave the car throughout the entire record attempt. And all I'm doing is I'm accompanied by, well, anyway, I'll tell you more about that in a moment. So at this point, actually, I'm actually driving back, trying to cross over I-5 to the Arfin Supercharger. And you have to go over a bridge and then back down again on the other side. And so I get to this milestone here where I've got 1 mile remaining, thinking, I'm not going to make it. And so the saving grace, the one saving grace I'd had was that I'd just been recently climbing up this hill. And so I turned around and started coasting downhill. And so I was at 421 miles, okay? And so with 1 mile remaining. And so I got it up to another basically 3 miles coasting. And the display still shows 1 mile remaining. And this is just by going downhill a bit. And it's still very few feet different from the Supercharger, but it was just enough for what I needed. And then finally, sort of like it vindicated my ghost. And there we go. I've got it something past what David had done, which is great. And David was a wonderful help, but you know, records are meant to be broken. And finally, I get up to 425, and I don't actually have any image after this. So I didn't actually find out, I was so tired by this point, I didn't actually find out what distance I'd done until I actually talked to Tesla afterwards. So, has anyone ever been here before? Well, it's okay. So imagine that same situation at 0. You're rolling into the garage, except the garage is not yours. Okay. So here I am, going around this loop. I know that I can't make it back to the Supercharger because of the hill in between. And so what I'd done is I'd taken notes earlier, you know, unlike certain journalists do. And these notes actually, you can see in the top section that they recorded all of the inside and outside temperatures and also the efficiency. So as it got very cold, close to 44 Fahrenheit, the efficiency, you know, steadily deteriorated to about 201 watt-hours per mile. You know, this is how the temperature looked actually if you look at the internal and external temperatures. So the car got up around about close to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the basic way I would air condition the car, since the climate was off, is every once in a while I'd open the windows, cycle the air, and then close the windows again. And even then, it's still got this hot. You look at the temperature, so close in the very night, it got as worse as 200 watt-hours per mile. And then during the day, when it was close to 70 degrees, it got as good as 177. I think that for sustained periods, you know, you should be able to do 180, which, and if you look at the difference between the two, that's a 10% difference in range. And so if you could find somewhere on the planet with a perfectly flat course that stayed 70 degrees throughout a 24-hour period, that would be the ideal conditions for doing anything better. But the other thing I did was on the 12-mile loop that I was doing, I recorded all of the locations that had lights on during the day. So when you talked about a garage, I had decided that I wouldn't make it back to mine And so I was going to have to bother somebody else instead. And so I thought, well, I might as well go to a building with lights on because, you know, there's nothing like getting some juice from somebody else. So I pull in at, this is where it gets kind of surprising. I pull in, I think it was about 4 a.m. At this home. I have no idea who lives here. All I know is that they had a light on during the day. That's it. And so as I pull in, I'm thinking, well, exactly how upset are they going to be with me trespassing on their property, asking for some power? And just when I'm trying to figure this out, I start hearing these yelping, barking of dogs. And I think, oh shit, I've just gone and woken up all of the dogs, which means it's going to wake up the owner as well. And I was just going to sit and sleep in my car for an hour until a civilized hour. But here I've gone, and so anyway, I'm thinking, oh shit, this is terrible. So I pull back out, and then I think it was 4:30 in the morning. The dogs have quieted down mostly, and I think, okay, right, well, I can just rest for now. And then I hear this. I've got someone walking towards me, 4:30 a.m. And so I think, well, okay, I've got one problem, but there's also another problem or two, and it's to do with the moonlight. So if we take you back to when I did the record, February 14th, it's only a very partial moon. So I'm looking at my car, and there's not enough moonlight to tell whether or not this guy is carrying a shotgun. And bear in mind, this is the Central Valley. It's just south of Bakersfield. This is completely alien territory to me. And so I think, well, what's for it? I get out of the car, and I put on my best British accent and said, "Hello, sorry for waking you up." Do you know, and it's one of those moments in life where you think, this could go either way. I really don't know what's going to happen next. And his name is Joe, and he turns out to be the most hospitable and generous person you can imagine. And so he pulls the car around to the side and lets me charge up, and he actually even drives me back to the hotel to pick up the charging cable because I didn't have it to save weight and extend range. And so I got to meet his family as well, because it turns out that I've actually woken up the other family members too. His younger brother, his daughter, and his parents are living with him. And what surprised me about all of this was that they were so understanding. I couldn't believe this. This was amazing to me. And that, bear in mind, they gave me some cocoa. I got to talking to all the family about the history and Mexican heritage. And I also, but by this point, I was exhausted. I'd been up for 24 hours, basically, and I could barely stay awake. And so Joe turns around to me and says, you can go sleep in the spare bedroom if you need to. I said, oh, thank you, Joe. And so I went off to sleep in this bedroom for several hours while the car was charging up. And that, I woke up, both kidneys were still there, which is great. And I had enough juice at that point to go off to the Supercharger at Arvin, and of course came back, and here is the family. And what I learned afterwards is that Ray Joe's the gentleman in the middle that was so kind helping me. But his younger brother, Ray, was so startled by this noise that apparently his first reaction was to pick up an axe. And, and so when we got a picture later on, I thought it was entirely appropriate that we had the axe in the picture. Because I was thinking, well, you know, that could have, I just couldn't imagine how you'd explain that to the insurance company. You know, I've had an axe through the bonnet because of, you know, it'd just be a bit too much. Joe offered me a hybrid solution. He said that, you know, this might help prevent you having this problem in the future. And, you know, in some ways, I think the engine was, you know, probably could have fit, actually. Yeah. And so the fun part for this came, though, actually, a number of months. Actually, it was actually only weeks later. I timed it for a very specific reason. It was again back at TED. And this time, it just happened to be that Elon was speaking. So here's what happened on that. There we go.
You offset the mass of the pack, and then you have to have a low drag coefficient so that you have good highway range. In fact, customers of the Model S are sort of competing with each other to try to get the highest possible range. I think somebody recently got 420 miles out of a single charge.
Bruno Bowden, who's here, did that, broke the world record, 425. That was the good news. The bad news was that to do it, he had to drive at 18 miles an hour constant speed and got pulled over by the cops.
So maybe I didn't mention that bit about the cops, yeah. So what had happened was that I had, as it had gone from day to night, I hadn't you know, I lost my visual markers. And so because of it, I actually went on a busier road. And there was only a stretch for about, you know, a few miles. And I was on the hard shoulder letting people pass. But just five cars behind me happened to be a police vehicle. And so if I could just set the scene for this, here I am, you know, sometimes people tell me I look like I'm 16, and here I am in this brand new car, and I've got chocolate wrappers strewn all around the passenger seat, and of course there's some classic questions that come out of this. License and registration. So it turns out I actually don't have a printed copy of my registration. And so I had to download it online and then show it to him, and he fortunately accepted that. Follow-up question, yeah, does this car belong to you? And the other classic, given the speed I was traveling, and the final one is like, what are you doing? And, well, I explained to him it's actually fairly simple, really. You know, I saw this blog in 2012 about hypermiling by this guy, by Straubel, and I decided to buy a vehicle expressly to do this, is by, you know, getting this record, we can help eliminate range anxiety and make Tesla successful and bring manufacturing back to the USA and then solve the world in the process. So how did you think it went over? Here's my ticket. And to be actually completely fair with the police officer, I mean, I did deserve it. And he was actually incredibly proper, and it took him about half an hour at the side of the road to actually just figure out what I'd done. And he says, I know you've done something, I've got to figure out what it is. And it turns out, actually, it's California Vehicle Code 22,400, impeding traffic by driving too slowly. And apparently, the officer, and he got this absolutely proper, he said that if you were a vehicle of animal husbandry, you would be allowed to drive that slow. So if it had been a horse and cart, I would have been fine. And I also didn't have the warning slow vehicle sign on the back. And so he got it here as me going 20 miles an hour. And so what everyone says is like different speeds. You know, Chris Anderson, the interviewer, said 18, and then the police officer said 20, and it was actually 22, but it doesn't really matter. And in many respects, I'm actually kind of proud of that ticket, as, you know, otherwise, you know, who would believe me? So a couple of thank yous that I've got is Alec, who's a friend of mine. He worked on the, with me at Google, and he also worked on the EV1. It was a great help. And David, the Model S record holder, Brad Armstrong, who did it for the Roadster. I talked with both of them. Eric Borsey photographs. There's Doug, and more. I'm sure there's some more Dougs at TMC, but they've been a great help. And of course, all of the people at Tesla as well. And that, I'm not sure how we're doing for time, actually, but I got something.
We're right at,
okay.
Just coming right up on it.
Okay, so I'll just do one brief thing, actually. I think my belief is that it is actually possible to do a 450-mile run. And this is one of the possibilities that I've been exploring. It's this 26, this is from Brad Armstrong, this is 26-mile range or loop that only varies by 27 feet, if you can believe it. And that's in Nevada. But the other, but I'll tell you what, I'll leave it at that for questions if we have time, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. 2 questions, and then we're going to go to break. And I'm sure Bruno will be at break too. And yeah. Okay, go ahead.
You mentioned 70 degrees optimal temperature. How about if you drove it and it was like 90 degrees outside and went down to 70 at night?
Oh, so if it went from 90 degrees down...
I mean, you'd be kind of hot in the car, I know, because it'd probably be 140 in the inside.
Yeah, I think that the ideal thing would be something that varies, the ambient temperature outside varies around 70 degrees. So if it went from like 60 to 80 degrees during the day, that would, or during your run, that would probably be ideal. But I don't have enough data to be able to tell you definitively. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Okay, last question.
Hi, Bruno. You talked about the inefficiency of regeneration, being 30% not efficient or 70% efficient. That's okay. I'm in agreement with that on a flat.
Yeah.
What if you are up on a certain altitude, then you would be contending with wind resistance. Do you have a break-even point as of which it would be best to have some regen going in as opposed to losing in the wind? You know what I mean?
Yes, so my experience, though, is going around, you know, for example, if you were going up and down huge hills and you were accelerating up to, I don't know, 70 miles an hour, then you're right, the regen actually may be better than the air resistance. However, large hills like that are not likely to get you the kind of range that you want. But I think, yeah, you're correct on your point. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give in one more question right here.
What battery type were you using, the 85 kilowatt or the 60?
So it was the 85 kilowatt battery. As much as the 60 kilowatt is a lovely vehicle, it's the only way that you could set a record is with the larger battery size.
Was it the performance version?
So it wasn't actually the performance version. I think that talking with Tesla, as long as you've got the 85 kilowatt hour battery, being performance or not doesn't make much difference. And the only thing that would make a difference is how much of a sort of like a lead foot you've got. So you just got to cut out the lead foot, and then both of them should be able to do it. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.